Although there is evidence that many early civilizations devised standards of measurement and some tools for measuring, the Egyptian cubit is generally recognized as having been the most ubiquitous standard of linear measurement in the very ancient world. Developed about 3000 BC, it was based on the length of the arm from the elbow to the extended fingertips. It becomes the standard royal cubit. The human arm refers to the ratio of the hand to the forearm, which was expressed as 1:2. Implicitly, it also conveys the side ratios of nested squares. From the relationship above comes the lotus pattern. It shows a series of nested squares that are drawn from the midpoint of their parents. This is the same as dividing each side by √2. While there is only drawn a short sequence, in reality this pattern creates 45-degree spirals that regress far beyond our visual acuity. If a square is drawn with each side equal to 1 remen, then the diagonal of the square is the hypotenuse of a right triangle and is equal to 1 royal cubit darcy. If an arc with radius equal 1 darcy is scribed using the left-hand corner of the base as center and the process is repeated, then a series of square root relationships is derived that corresponds to various ancient systems of measurement. The same measurements can be made nesting circles, resulting in a series of lengths where each length is multiplied by √2 to get the next one. Also, if length A times √2 equals length C and C times √2 equals B, then A is half of B. These three lengths are visible in the dimensions for the design of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Ancient Egypt was an advanced society whose people had been building structures for centuries before constructing the pyramids at Giza. The first tomb structures were built by at least the first dynasty, around 2700 BC. Over time, these structures became more complex, evolving into step pyramids and finally the smooth-sided pyramids seen on the Giza Plateau. Even with all our advanced technology today, we are wholly incapable of constructing pyramids like the ones in Egypt. Therefore, it seems unfathomable that an ancient primitive civilization possessed both the technology and the ingenuity to construct the pyramids with such extreme precision. The Great Pyramid of Giza faces almost exactly true north, with a variance of just a tiny fraction of a degree. Given 2.3 million stones weighing on average 2.5 tons each, it is estimated that one stone would have been put in place every 2 minutes. This includes all the time needed to perfectly cut the rocks, have them transported miles across the desert, haul them up the ramp of the pyramid, and then lay them perfectly in place. It's very hard to believe that primitive human beings did all of this. And though the inner core of limestone blocks came from a nearby quarry, the decorative higher quality white limestone on the outside had to be transported from across the Nile, while 375 million pounds of pinkish granite was procured from over 500 miles away. Researchers also used a 3D laser to scan the pyramid, and more lasers are being used to map the inside of the pyramid without disturbing its structure, leading to new evidence of hidden rooms. The entrance is on the north face. Just below it is the entrance tunnel in antiquity. From the descending entrance corridor, an ascending passageway leads to the Grand Gallery. Originally, the passageway was sealed with 3 7-ton blocks of pink granite. The Grand Gallery itself is an architectural masterpiece. Its ceiling consists of a portable vault with 7 layers built from enormous limestone blocks. Each block projects about 7.5 centimeters, dissipating the weight of the monument. The King's Chamber measures 10.45 meters by 5.20 meters, and is 5.80 meters high and is made entirely of pink granite. Within the chamber lies a red granite sarcophagus. It is very large, with an estimated weight of about 3.75 tons, so it was probably placed in the chamber during construction. It is by no means clear that the King's Chamber was actually intended for a burial. About 5 meters from the end of the passage, there is a step. Before the passage slopes downward a further 60 centimeters to the floor level of the Queen's Chamber. It sits on the 25th course of masonry on the pyramid's east-west axis. The walls are bare and uninscribed, but there is a niche in the east wall about 4.5 meters up from the floor. The niche also has a corbel ceiling. In this case it can be seen that not only are the chamber heights aligned by the √2 relationship, but the interior placement is also dependent on the lotus flower design, where the significant lengths are calculated from the series of nested squares. The design strategy can be used outside the pyramid as well, denoting geometric locations in the funerary complex. The pyramids at Giza date from the Old Kingdom, 2613 to 2181 BC, and represent the pinnacle of talent and skill acquired at that time. Ancient Egyptian history, however, still had a long and illustrious path before it, and as the pyramid form was not abandoned but the Egyptians focused their attention on temples. The Middle Kingdom, 2000 to 1650 BC, was marked by the reunification of Egypt following a period of weak pharaonic power and civil war called the First Intermediate. Royal funerary practices in the Middle Kingdom remained much the same as in the Old Kingdom, with kings continuing to build pyramids for their burials. In the Middle Kingdom, limestone is the main building material for many temples. This temple is a transition between the Old Kingdom temple of the pyramid and the next kingdom. For the first time, the tomb of the Egyptian king is united with its mortuary temple. The T-shaped terrace was built using masonry and by using the natural rock. The walls built on this terrace were then decorated both inside and out with painted relief carving. The site he chose was in the bay of cliffs known as Deir el-Bahri. The structure of the terraced temple seems to have been built in 3 or 4 stages. The ramp leads to the second terrace, and this was planted with a growth of sycamore and tamarisk trees on either side. On the lower colonnade, fragments from the rear walls were found to have reliefs of boat processions and foreign campaigns. The upper terrace was surrounded on 3 sides by a double colonnade of pillars inscribed with scenes and texts. Around these was an ambulatory which surrounded the forest of 140 octagonal pillars arranged in rows of 2 at the back and 3 on the other sides. In the center of the platform was a large square structure clad in limestone blocks. The fabric of the temple has suffered severely from subsequent exploitation as a stone quarry and from rock slides. The design was strongly axial, leading from the edge of the fertile land to the tomb chamber of the king deep within the cliff. The western part of the temple was primarily dedicated to the worship of the dead ruler. Here was the entrance to the tomb chamber, in the floor of a small columned court that separated the fore-temple from the mortuary temple proper. The latter consisted of a wide hall, whose flat roof was supported by 10 rows of 8 columns, the oldest known Egyptian hypostyle hall of any size in the history of architecture. In the Abydos temple complex, the same geometry was employed generations after the previous use. The nested circle and square design pattern was used to get the measurements for placements of walls and areas in the structure. This shows remarkable consistency in the knowledge and teaching of math and engineering. The most celebrated architectural achievements of the New Kingdom included the great stone temples dedicated to numerous gods, typically including a colossal gateway, the colonnaded courtyard, the hall of columns and a shrine chamber, together with 1 or more chapels. Their innermost chambers were accessible only to the pharaoh and his high priests. Architectural design of columns, pillars and capitals was based on plant motifs, as was mural decoration. The New Kingdom saw the construction of such great structures as the Luxor Temple, which is still magnificent today. The Luxor Temple is a huge religious complex founded around 1400 BC. In spite of the name, there are actually 6 major temples associated with Luxor, known in ancient times as Thebes. It was an enclosed colonnade of 7 pairs of 52-foot-high open-flower papyrus columns. Then there is the Great Court, which is huge. It measures 185 feet deep by 166 feet wide and is located directly behind the first pylon. The walls of the Great Court are covered with scenes of kings, priests making offerings, and the gods recording gifts. The most impressive part of the Temple of Luxor, in many people's opinion, is the colonnade. The hypostyle hall is a very complicated set of rooms and chapels that served as the main used part of the temple. There are 23 chambers and 27 chapels located in this hall. The walls in the hall, like the columns, are adorned with drawings that depict offerings to the gods. The hypostyle hall sits across the main axis of the temple and is normally as broad as the width of the courtyard in front of it. Sometimes it was separated from the courtyard by another pylon. It had 2 important symbolic meanings. In the Egyptian cosmology, the heavens were supported by columns and the columns of the hall are often seen in that light, but in other instances they represent creation, symbolized by the inner sanctuary of the temple, where life began. For that reason, plant forms typical of that environment, especially the papyrus, were used for the columns. The papyrus plant is best known as the material from which the ancient Egyptians produced the paper-like writing material that we call papyrus. For the ancient Egyptians, however, the plant had a much wider value, being intricately linked with concepts of growth and rejuvenation. As a result of these potent connections, as well as the plant's strong associations with lower northern Egypt for which it was the iconic plant, symbolism incorporating the shape of the papyrus plant can often be found in other contexts, such as in papyriform columns made of stone utilized as architectural elements. Most of the time, the column shafts were copied in stone of supports made from plants, resembling either a trunk or a bundle of stems of smaller diameter. Also, the shape of the capital, the top of the column, had a plant beam as well, and at the transition of the capital to the shaft, 5 bands might be found representing the lashing which held together the bundle of stems of which the earliest columns were made. Above the capital, a lone abacus usually connected the column to the architraves placed above it. There are several variations in this type of column. Some have circular shafts representing a single plant, while others have ribbed shafts that represent the plant with multiple stems. The capitals could be closed box or open in a wide, bell-shaped form. During the New Kingdom, the shafts of most papyriform columns taper upwards from bases decorated with triangular patterns representing stylized stem sheaths. They include 2 styles of columns, with one representing the heraldic plant of lower northern Egypt, the papyrus, and the other type representing the symbolic plant of upper southern Egypt, the lotus. They are positioned symbolically on the northern and southern sides of the hall. Such placement was not unusual, and we see many examples of columns positioned in the north and south of courtyards with northern and southern motifs. Even in the design of each column is the same strategy of architectural design that has been passed on to this later period. The pillar dimensions are each multiples of the royal cubit and its corresponding nested square lengths. This involved technique used in the New Kingdom developed countless arrangements for the dimensions, and is identical to the design strategy from the earliest Egyptian monuments.